This morning's first speaker is Linda Hodgdon, and she is, if you don't know what an SLP is, this is when you get to find out. She's a speech and language pathologist, and she's internationally known as a pioneer in developing the use of visual strategies to support communication for students with autism spectrum disorders and related learning needs. Her training programs are packed with best practices and effective ideas for using a range of low-tech to high-tech visual tools. Really important with the budget in Illinois to know the low-tech as well as the high-tech, including video and tablets like iPads and apps to meet the communication, behavior, and social needs of these students. A powerful and entertaining presenter, Linda shares practical information, inspires participants to accomplish new goals with students immediately. And you have in your bags her book. I think the book you have is Visual Strategies for Improving Communications. And she's also written Solving Behavior Problems in Autism. These are considered essential resources for both professionals and parents. They're most recommended books in the field. She provides support for other SLPs, for educators, for parents of students with special needs, and her online blog and video training materials are available. Linda's the owner of lots of technology, so she's a very popular babysitting grandmother. So please welcome Linda to the stage.
Okay, now we just have to do a little test with this mic. Can you all hear me? Okay? We're good. Good morning. I am really glad to be here because I think that the topic of your conference is such an exciting one. It's a topic that blends two groups of people together that I think really can blend well together. And what I will be sharing with you today is a little bit different from your program yesterday, because yesterday you heard a lot from people who have a lot of personal experience with autism, with the autism spectrum. You heard a lot of people speaking who either are on the autism spectrum themselves, or they have family members or work with people on the autism spectrum. So today I'm going to be bringing something a little bit different to you, and that is something a little bit more from the educational perspective. I am a speech and language pathologist, and over the years I've worked with, hundreds if not thousands of individuals on the autism spectrum and their families and their educators. And so the things I'm sharing with you today come from a lot of experience. And as I was preparing this program, I was starting out to give you 5 essentials for engineering the library environment, and I worked it up to 12. So, there are some key things that I think if you understand a little bit more from my perspective as an educator, it will help you be a better communication partner, and it will help you create a good communication environment that can make a difference for everybody involved. Now, we haven't figured this out yet, but I'm going to kind of go like that, and my visual cue here will tell her. And as I said, SLP means I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I really focus on the communication interactions between individuals. And I think this was all in my introduction, so we're going to move on. In case you can't tell, I'll show you in this program that I do have a passion for visual strategies, and I'll explain what all of that means. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about several different things. One is some things about common misunderstandings about the autism spectrum, and the most important thing that you need to understand about individuals on the autism spectrum. We're going to be talking about how to use visual tools to engineer your environments, and some considerations for teachers and caregivers and employees and those individuals on the autism spectrum, plus lots more things. So we go on. Oh, wrong way. There we go. Well, we need to go the other direction here. Okay, here we go. All right. Next one. You know, I learned a long time ago those slides are for me to help me remember what I'm going to say when I'm speaking. All right, now, this is a question that's really going to help me in my talk because I know that we're all dealing with libraries, but I just need to know a little bit about who you are serving, okay? So, how many of you are in your library situation, whatever that is, do you serve educators? How many of you serve educators? Okay, how many of you serve caregivers, either parents or, you know, other caregivers? Okay, and how many of you deal with employees who have autism or on the autism spectrum? Okay, that's great. And then one other question is, what age level do you serve? So how many of you serve young children, like preschoolers and elementary age? Okay, how many of you serve the middle age range, like middle school, high school? Okay, how many of you serve adults? All right, see, so this is good because there's a little bit of everything in there. And that will help, and you'll see where this applies as we go on talking, okay? There's two problems that I think are key for those who live with and work with and provide for individuals on the autism spectrum. One thing is what I call in one ear and out the next. This is a situation that parents and teachers have to deal with a lot with younger students, but it's also something that we can deal with adults and everybody in between. And that is, just because I'm saying something to you, it doesn't mean that it registers in here. You know, I can talk to you, but it doesn't mean you're getting what I'm saying. And I bet all of us have had some of those situations in our lives. This is not just an autism thing. I bet if you're a parent of children, you can tell me situations in your own family where the parent is talking to the child and it's just like it's going in one ear and out the other, and it's not making any sense. But the idea here is that just because we are communicating to someone, it doesn't mean that it's registering and they're understanding everything that we're saying, okay? Now, the other thing is, problem number 2 is what I'm going to classify as troubling situations, okay? And I'm making that just a general category right now because troubling situations are situations where there's some kind of a problem that needs to get figured out. And when we're talking about individuals on the autism spectrum, that problem can often appear to be a behavior problem. And it can be a small, subtle behavior problem, or it can be a great big meltdown, or anywhere in between, okay? So those are the two things that we're going to be kind of thinking about as we work through this program. Now, who can benefit? We're focusing on the topic of autism in this conference, but everything that I'm talking about with you can benefit not only individuals on the autism spectrum, but any of those individuals that come into your environment that have special learning needs, individuals with mental, intellectual disabilities, individuals with ADHD, individuals with different kinds of behavior problems for a lot of different reasons. So the things that we're talking about can be a benefit for lots of individuals, not just those on the autism spectrum. Okay. But this is what we need to understand about autism. You heard some wonderful first-person stories yesterday, but I'm going to add a little bit of information for that. Okay. The key word in autism spectrum disorders is the word spectrum. And what we need to do is remember that there's a huge spectrum. And at this conference now, you've had the opportunity to hear and to talk to and hear the stories of a number of people on the spectrum. But they're at the more skilled end of the spectrum. They have, you know, significant abilities and talents and academic, you know, achievements and so forth that are in the average range or higher than average, and that's that's one end of the spectrum. But what we need to remember is that there's another end of the spectrum, and that is those students who have more significant challenges. They can have more significant intellectual challenges. They can have more significant communication challenges. They can have more significant sensory challenges. The individuals that have been speaking at this conference have been sharing some of the self-awareness that they have about their own personal lives and their own personal challenges. And those that have a really good understanding of themselves can really thrive and can be very successful. But there are individuals on that spectrum who don't have that ability in the same way, but they still may be part of your library environment. And when I think about the autism spectrum, Temple Grandin is one person who many of you are probably familiar with. She's brilliant. She's a brilliant woman. She has developed a career in handling livestock. She is a speaker about autism. She's done lots of research about her own. She's very gifted in her ability to describe her own personal strengths and weaknesses and challenges and that kind of thing. So she's a very good spokesperson for those on the autism spectrum. And one of the things that she says a lot, which relates to this conference, is individuals on the autism spectrum have to go out and get a job. She's very, very clear about that. Susan Boyle, some of you may know who she is. She was on Britain's Got Talent and she won that competition, and she's a beautiful, beautiful singer. She didn't learn until after she won that competition that she has Asperger's, but she has beautiful, beautiful talents. But then we also have individuals who have very, very severe challenges. And so that range is there, and learning about one's own strengths and weaknesses and challenges and successes is a lifelong process for many of these individuals. Okay, and you might have individuals on the autism spectrum in your library and you don't even know it, because their behavior is appropriate for the situation, their communication is appropriate for the situation, they can get their needs met in that situation, and that's just fine. But you may also keep this in mind, that those on the higher end of the spectrum, the people that might work for you, or that are, people speaking here yesterday, just because they speak really well and just because they have a lot of strengths and skills, it doesn't mean that everything comes easily for them. And I like the analogy of the Swiss cheese, because sometimes these individuals will have some little Swiss cheese holes in their lives. And if you have some conversations with them, they'll tell you, well, I can do this and this, but this is difficult for me. And so they recognize what they need to learn. But there are other individuals on the spectrum that can have difficulty with certain specific things, and even though they can do this really well, this is hard for them, but they might not be able to describe it as well. They might not be able to communicate that need as well as somebody else can. A very primary part of the diagnosis on the autism spectrum is that those individuals can have difficulty with social skills and communication skills. And again, here you have been hearing from some people who have mastered a lot of that quite well. That they are very good at communicating their wants and needs, they're very good at communicating, but they will also tell you where they have some Swiss cheese holes in their communication abilities or their social skills. They can explain that to you. Those on the autism spectrum, there's a certain percentage of those individuals who have significant challenges with expressive communication. There's a wide range. There's a very large percentage of your students on the autism spectrum who are nonverbal. There's a large percentage of them who can talk, but their ability to talk is not real clear and not real functional. And then there are those who can talk and express their wants and needs, but they can't have more more significant conversations. They're very basic conversations. So again, there's a whole wide range there. But the part that I have really focused on in my own work is the difficulty in understanding. And on the whole spectrum, these individuals can have difficulty in understanding. They can have difficulty understanding speech and language. They can have difficulty understanding communication interaction. They can have difficulty understanding the cues and clues in the environment. And that difficulty in understanding is very significant, it's pervasive, and it's something that most of us as communication partners don't necessarily understand. That difficulty understanding is challenging because it's invisible. And yesterday, as Brian was talking, one of the things that I wrote down in my little notes, is tell me what you think I said, because that gap in understanding sometimes can be very significant. And this is something to keep in mind in understanding the autism spectrum. Just because an individual talks, and they can talk quite well, they can be very, very verbally skilled, but that doesn't mean that they understand everything. And the part that can be most challenging is some of that social stuff, like I don't understand reading your facial expressions, or I don't understand what you mean by what you said, that kind of thing. Okay. Communication involves a lot of different skills, and we don't always think about everything that's a part of communication. But figuring out things like when to go, what to do, where to go, how to do it, what can I do, what can't I do, what are the rules, what are the invisible rules, what comes next, what are my choices, all of that stuff is part of communication. And those are the kinds of things that our individuals on the autism spectrum might have more difficulty with. I love these traffic things. Now you have some here that they have a countdown, so that you're stopping, but 10, 9, 8, 7, 6 like that, because everybody doesn't really understand the same way. And some of these, they're giving you yellow lights and red lights and green lights, and they're giving you signs, and I've heard some of them that say, stop, do not cross, because everybody receives the information a little bit differently. And some need it in colors, some need words, some of them say wait, some need voices, a lot of things like that. And so keep in mind that everybody hears and understands a little bit differently. And that's an important thing too. It's kind of like understanding which form of communication do you understand the best? Okay. And so communication involves a lot of different things. It involves establishing attention or shifting attention from one thing to another. Now, as we work with individuals on the autism spectrum, one of the greatest challenges that we as communication partners need to remember is I have to get your attention before I communicate with you. And the thing is that sometimes these individuals are so focused on what they're doing that they block everything out. It's kind of like hyper-focus. I got an email from a mom one day who was the president of the local autism society, and she said, well, all of the parents talked about this, and we all decided that we had the same problem. And what we figured out is if we're in one room of the house and we want our child's in another room and we call them like, Johnny, it's time for dinner. She said 100% of the time they don't come. And so we talked about it a little bit, and I said, well, how do you know he even hears that message? Because if he's in another room, he might be playing with a toy or involved in something, and he's so tuned out to everything in the environment that he doesn't even hear that you're calling. And so what I told her she needed to do, basically, or they all needed to do, go in the other room, get his attention, and then tell him what to do. Well, this is something that we don't necessarily think of, but it's that one extra step that I need to do to make sure that I'm getting my information into you. And so it's being sensitive as a communication partner to what the other person needs. But communication involves establishing attention, following everything that's rapidly changing, taking in information, processing it, storing information, retrieving past information, and sending information. Well, the part that most people pay attention to is the last one on the list. It's like, well, how does this individual send information? Can he talk? Is he coherent when he talks? Does he make sense when he talks? Can he have a good conversation with me? And that's the part that people pay attention to. It's the part that we can see and hear right there. But this whole system can have challenges. The whole system might not work very efficiently. So it's not just an expressive communication problem that they can have, but it's the whole system that can have some challenges. So when we talk about autism, there's a lot of things about behaviors. Now, this is something that you'll see more in your students that are lower skilled or your students that are younger, but they can have a range from, on one end of the spectrum can be that they do things that are annoying. On the other end of the spectrum, they can do things that, can be very severe. They can have severe meltdowns. They can have very aggressive behavior. But this is right here, this middle part is what can cause a lot of the behavior challenges. These students can frequently have difficulty beginning activities, ending activities, have difficulty with transitions, transitioning from one job to another, one environment to another, one person to another, one caregiver to another, all that kind of stuff. Anything that involves change is a time when there can be confusion, misunderstanding, behavior problems in younger children. And those troubling situations can frequently be related to communication, and that's the part that I really, really pay attention to a lot. So to summarize some communication skills in autism, these individuals can have difficulty with expressive communication. Some more than others, but that can be a challenge. And I'll tell you a time when it can be a very interesting challenge, and that is if a person's upset. In other words, if life is going well, I'm happy, you're happy, everything is happening just like I want it to, my communication with you can be very good, very appropriate, it can work. But if there's something that's bothering me, something is upsetting me, you might not even know what it is. It could be something as simple as somebody ate up all my Rice Krispies today for breakfast. And so I didn't get my Rice Krispies for breakfast, or something changed, or something is different. And whatever that is, that's enough to upset me in some way. And then when I'm upset, my ability to communicate my wants and needs isn't quite the same. It's different somehow. Maybe I keep saying the same thing over and over again, or maybe I'm telling you something, but it's not really what I really mean. And the bottom line is that when people are upset and when things are not going well, that can just be the time when the communication is not working so well. But considering all of that, these individuals have a comparative skill in taking in visual information. They seem to understand what they see better than they understand what they hear. And when we understand that about them, it has some huge implications about how we might communicate better or become better communication partners with them. So this is something that's common. And when I talk to teachers, I talk to parents, well, he understands everything I say. That's basically what they say about the kids with autism. And the reason he's not doing what I want him to do is because he's being willful, he's being stubborn, he wants to be the boss. We come up with all these excuses why he's not doing what I want him to do, but he understands everything I say. Have you ever heard anybody say that about a lot of people? It's not just an autism thing, is it? Yeah. And so there's a lot of different reasons why our students can understand. But it's not all because they're listening to what's coming out of somebody's mouth. Maybe they're paying attention if I said, oh, you know what, I'm going to do this. Just a minute. I'm so sorry I did that. Did not mean to do that, but I apologize. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I apologize. Okay. If somebody said, can you bring me a bottle of water? Is he listening to this or is he looking at this? So these are some things, but it's kind of like this. This is what wives say. Go to the store, lay down the mulch, wash and wax the car, get the kids at school, rent some videos, and finish the rest of the dishes. And this is what husbands hear. Go lay down and get some rest. And I think the bottom line is that the idea I'm trying to get across is that communication is not as simple and easy sometimes as we think it is. Now, this is some research about autism, okay? And remember, we have the spectrum of autism, but this is what the research says. Students with autism typically have difficulty processing auditory information. Now, it may not be every student, and it may not be all the time, but the difficulty with processing auditory information is common and pervasive with this population. And it's not an auditory acuity problem. They can hear just fine, okay? But it has to do with auditory processing. And when the sound goes into the brain, the student's not able to make meaning from it, or not able to do that as quickly as other people can. Or perhaps it has to do with speed. They can't process it quickly enough. Imagine driving a go-kart on a freeway. You know, you're going along and you're doing just fine with that, but you can't keep up with the faster vehicles. So there's a pacing thing and a speed thing that can be a part of this bigger picture. And just keeping in mind that processing auditory information is one part of a very complex set of needs and challenges. So let's go on for just a second here. The research says that people with ASD process information in their brain differently. Okay, it doesn't mean better, it doesn't mean worse, it just means different. Okay? Here's what one child said. He said, you know, Dad, when you talk, I see your mouth move, but I don't hear the words just yet. Then the sound comes to me and I kind of swish it around in there trying to sort it out. Isn't that an interesting description of language processing? But it's different. So considering all of that, what we want to do is evaluate you and me right now, because you and I are half of the communication interaction. And what you and I do or do not do can make a huge difference in how all of this communication is going to be successful or not. So let's just see. What we talk about is forms of communication. Speech is one form of communication. And you know, I was at the airport yesterday, and I was observing. I guess I observe a lot about communication, but there was a girl on a microphone at one of the gates, and she had to, you know, ladies and gentlemen, get in line, and this is what you're supposed to do, and this is where you're supposed to go, this is what the flight is. But she was rattling that off so fast that I couldn't understand a word she was saying. And I was sitting right there, you know, watching her, and I couldn't understand. And sometimes people don't realize that something simple as the speed that you're talking can make a huge difference in if the other person is going to understand what you even want. I mean, have you ever had messages on your answering machine on your telephone or your voicemail and you couldn't understand what the people were saying and you had to listen to it 3 or 4 times before you got the information? You know, what forms do you use? Sometimes people use sign language, but that's not real common in autism. But do you use pointing and gestures and body language to support your communication? He said, look here, because this is what I want you to do, or what I want you to see, or let me take you over here and show you where I want you to do something. Do you use pictures and objects and written language to support your communication with others, instead of just telling them what you want them to do? Do you write down a little list, a little checklist or something like that? Or do you write down a little explanation? Or if we're trying to talk about something that's maybe a problem where you might be a little bit nervous or upset, can we write it down so that we can go back to it and refer to that over and over again? Here's the problem. There's a book called Brain Rules, and if you don't have it in your library, get it. If you do have it in your library, read it. Very, very interesting. But the information in this book is not about autism, it's about you and me. Okay, it's about neurotypical people. And I just want to bring up one point in this, because what it says in this book is vision trumps all of our other senses. That we are, the way our brains are developed, the visuals in our brain, we are more visual than anything else. And I just wonder, right now in this group, how many of you would prefer to hear something to learn it? Would you prefer to hear it? How many of you would prefer to hear it? Okay, how many of you would prefer to see it? See, and so you're just supporting this research. You know, and when you think in our society about television and video games and all of our iPhones and all of that kind of stuff, most of us are very, very visually oriented. And so what he says is we learn and remember best through pictures, not through written or spoken words. Isn't that interesting? And so he's saying that about you and me, that all of us here. And so I think about that if all of the neurotypical people prefer visual information, what about our individuals on the autism spectrum who are more visual, I think, than a lot of us are? Interesting thing. So, in remembering that, we learn to remember best through pictures, not through written and spoken words. So, in all the work I've done over the years on this topic, this is my conclusion, is that the majority of students with autism are visual learners. They understand what they see better than they understand what they hear. So now that we know that, it's a really important step that we need to take. See, this is where the use of visual strategies comes in. And you know what? I'm going to guess that you all have some visual strategies in your libraries right now. Things that you see, directions that you give people, you know, labels and things like that. You already have some things like that in your environment, I'm sure you do. And yet there are more ways that we can use those visual strategies. And that's what I want to share with you. It's kind of like the iceberg thing. It's really pretty simple. It's like giving information in a visual way. But most people don't understand the why of it, and that's why I'm trying to share with you some of the why part, because as you understand the why, then you're going to see how important it is. You're going to understand how important it is. And I'll tell you what happens is few people understand all of the possibilities. Now our visuals can be low-tech, they can be high-tech. There's lots of different forms and formats. When I got started with this stuff, years and years ago, we were trying to find pictures out of magazines, and we were trying to find coloring book pictures and things like that that we could use for students. But nowadays, we have, you know, such a plethora available to us. We have so many things. And I'll tell you, my favorite place to get pictures to use now is to do a Google image search. Everything is on Google now, so you can find so many things that can be used, and I'll show you a few samples as we go. But when you're thinking about using visuals, the one thing that you have to think about is the individual that they're created for. Now, some of you raised your hands to say that you serve in your environment very young children, okay? And what you create as a visual for very young children may be different than the visuals you would create for an adult. They might not be. You know, some of the things can be the same, but keeping in mind that there's a wide range of ability and there's a wide range of need, there can also be a wide range of what our visuals can be. And to keep in mind that there are a variety of pieces to all those visuals. In other words, if I'm creating something for a very young child, I would want it to be bigger, more obvious, more concrete, more realistic. Things for older individuals might just be a written list of some kind. So there's a wide variety, but what we create needs to match the skill level and the need of the individuals who are using it. So we have two goals. One goal is we want to set up environments so that they accommodate the people who are using those environments. And then the second thing is you and I want to become better communication partners. Because if we can make some adjustments as needed in what we do and how we interact with individuals, then we can be more effective as communication partners. So considering what we know, I have a list of 12 essentials that I'm going to share with you. Now, I wrote an ebook, Classroom Essentials, and what I did is I adapted those classroom essentials to be library essentials, and that's what we're going to be seeing. And you'll see lots of visual strategies. Now, number one, I think everybody can benefit from a camera. And you know what? If you have a more modern phone, you have one right on your phone, so it's not a big deal. It used to be, oh my goodness, I have to go to the get the camera and take the film to the drugstore. We don't have to do any of that anymore. And I think that very often taking photos of the real things, whatever those real things are, can be some of the most effective visuals that we can use. So that if I am talking about the tables and chairs, if I take a picture of that table and chair or that desk or that room or something like that, it's very good. But when you think about the camera is just a tool, and we take pictures, and then how are we going to use them? And that's what we'll be figuring out along the way. For very young children, lower skilled individuals, I like nice, real concrete things like that. But then one other thing about pictures, and this is a strange thing because most people don't think of this, and that is what makes meaning for the individuals that I'm doing this for. I was doing a consultation with a mom not long ago. Her daughter is an adult, now young adult, or in her early 20s, some significant communication challenges, and I was working with the mom about making a communication book for her daughter. And so mom put this picture over here, like this, in the girl's book to represent the laundry. Okay, and one day I talked to mom on the phone, and she was really concerned because her daughter was having a huge problem all day, huge behavior problem. Mom couldn't figure it out. Well, in talking with her and talking with the daughter, what I finally figured out is that the girl was upset because her favorite shirt was in the laundry that day. Okay, and mom said, I don't know why she didn't tell me. I have a laundry picture there, but you know what? She didn't know that that's what that meant. And we talked about what she really needed was a picture of the girl's own laundry basket. Do you understand how sometimes it's subtle differences like this? And then you think about how does a typical young woman on the autism spectrum, has she ever seen laundry hanging on a line? Maybe never in her life. Now you would know what that was, and I would know what that is. And there are a lot of individuals in her same age range that would figure out what that meant. But to her, it didn't have any meaning compared to this. And so, I guess I'm sharing this just to help you understand that sometimes it's subtle things that can make a difference in terms of individuals understanding or not understanding. And so what I love to do when I'm working with students is say, I show them a picture and I say, well, what is this? What does this mean? Or I have them help me pick out a picture sometimes, because what I think it means and what they think it means might not be the same at all. Okay. But think about how we can use pictures, we can use visual tools for giving individuals information. It can be giving them information about things in the environment, giving them information about things in their lives, giving them information about a conversation that we're having. Yesterday Brian talked a lot about conversations with people and the relationships that come from conversations. And so we talked this morning about how you can turn that conversation into something written Because when you write it down and then you go back and read it over again, you know, sometimes that changes the meaning, or sometimes that validates the meaning, or it clarifies the meaning, that kind of thing. And so the simple task of writing things down, you know, can make a huge difference, and it's a way of giving information. Number 2, schedules. I think, you know, one of the reasons that libraries and autism fit so well together is that I think a library has a lot of structure just naturally in it, and that structure is very inviting for individuals on the autism spectrum. And so then you think about what parts of that structure can you enhance or can you embellish, and the idea of scheduling, giving somebody, you know, a timeline, giving them exact information, what comes first, what comes next, what order are you supposed to do things, that kind of thing. Can be very interesting. And schedules help prepare individuals for transitions. And the transitions are the hard part. You're supposed to stop working on this and you're supposed to start this. You're supposed to look over here for this, but when you're done with that, then you have to go do something else. And so the schedule begins to give information to help those transitions, which are the potentially difficult, you know, times for individuals. Transitions. Some are more difficult than others. And if you are able to have a conversation with someone and ask them, you know, what's easy for you, what's harder for you, you might really be surprised sometimes on which things are more difficult. You know, it might not be what you expect, I guess is the way to say that. Calendars, same thing. Schedules, calendars, it's giving information, it's the structure, and that's what's really important. And you know, can we just stop here for a second? One of the things about calendars that can be really, really important, or schedules and calendars, is not only telling individuals what's going to happen, but telling them what's not going to happen or what's changing. I have a story that I talk about where, you know, around the holidays, giving individuals, giving children, okay, information about what's going to be happening. And we talk about, for example, the holiday of Christmas, okay, December 25th. But there's more to Christmas than just December 25th. So I was talking to a group of parents and saying, maybe what you need to do is tell your child which day you're going to go Christmas shopping. Which day are you going to put the Christmas tree up? And maybe the most important thing on that calendar, on that list, is telling them which day the Christmas tree is going to come down. So it's not just telling them what's going to happen, it's telling them what's not going to happen or what's going to change, or thinking about some of those details that everybody else might assume, but this individual doesn't assume in the same way. It's thinking another level deeper with some of that. Okay, oh, did I go back to, oh, you went back to that, okay. Predictable routines. You know, our individuals on the autism spectrum are very comfortable with routines. I am too, are you? Yeah. You know, I kind of follow the same routine every day when I get up in the morning and stuff. And if something interrupts my routine, that can throw me off for a while. You know, or when I'm traveling and I go to a hotel and something doesn't work out right, you know. It's a little bit, but the routines. And it's thinking about what the routines are and then giving information for what the routines should be. And in that concept of routine, something that I think is an interesting thing to think about. There's a term that we call executive function. And not everybody, but there are individuals on the autism spectrum, there are individuals with ADHD particularly, that can have difficulty with executive function. And it's a big mouthy term, but what it means is kind of figuring out how to do something with all the details and doing it in the right order and things like that. And so there was a blog post on the internet, and I loved it because the teacher said that she had a bunch of students in her room, in her classroom, who had difficulty with executive functioning, and she would say, clean your desk. And when they got done cleaning their desk, it looked just like it did before. It's kind of like telling kids, clean your bedroom. And so she said that what she had to do is write a task analysis. Clean your desk means take everything out and put it on top, throw away all the garbage papers, and then what do you do with each of these things and stuff like that. See, and so I think sometimes what we need to keep in mind is that not only do we give a task or give a direction, but then we have to tell what the steps are to accomplish that, so that we're giving them all the details. And here's my word, assumed information. Remember that Swiss cheese hole thing that I talked about before? Sometimes what we have to do is remember that just because my logic says do this and this, doesn't mean somebody else's logic will have them do it in the same way. And of course, I would think of throwing away all the scrap paper in the trash, but somebody else might not think of it in that way because they're trying to reorganize what's there and not thinking about getting rid of something, or their thinking might be different. It's not better or worse, but it's just different. And so part of that is teaching exactly what needs to happen. No, we went one too far. The term is task analysis. And these individuals can benefit greatly from task analysis. So when you're doing a job, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. But here, this is just an example of ordering a pizza. And you call the number, you say what you want, you set the timer, listen for a knock at the door. And then this one says, look to see if it is the delivery person. Now, very honestly, if I was writing a task analysis for how to order a pizza and get it delivered to my house, I probably wouldn't have thought of that step. How many of you would have thought of that step? Not too many hands up, see, but a lot of us wouldn't. But that's a really good example of when we're thinking of a task analysis and giving instructions and giving directions, we have to make sure that we're including what I call the assumed steps. Because what's assumed to me might not be assumed to somebody else. You're doing really good, by the way. She's watching my visual cues here. Quiet spot. I love the room here next door, the quiet room here. And I went in and I looked at all the fidget toys, and I also love the fidget toy I got here. Now, I'm going to have to figure out how to get 4 more because I have 5 grandchildren. But, what's interesting is my daughter told me last week that the school that my grandchildren go to, the school sent a note home saying, these are not allowed in school anymore because they're a distraction. And my immediate reaction was, well, why don't you teach the students how to use them appropriately instead of banning them? Because these can help a lot. I have, one grandchild that's a nail biter. Well, doing this instead of biting your nails, I think would be very appropriate. But I'm going to have to figure out more because I can't go home with just one anyway. But the idea of having a quiet spot, a timeout, some place where I can regroup. It's not a punishment thing at all, but it's just like, for some reason, maybe the external, like when I accidentally, and I apologize, walked in front of the speaker. It wouldn't surprise me if there were a couple of people that went into the quiet room right about that, because there's just something that's bothering me a little bit. Or I just need to take a break, or I just need a mental break for a few minutes or whatever. That's a really good thing. And employees might need that. Patrons of the library might need that. And so it's a nice opportunity. And there's a lot of different ways that you can use it, but to remember that it's not a punishment thing, it's a, I need a little space thing. And I think all of us would go in there once in a while, wouldn't we? Yeah. And the quiet spot can give some options. Sometimes students need to learn how to manage themselves better. I feel like I'm getting a little worked up. I feel like I'm getting bothered by something. Let me go quiet down. And remember that spectrum that we're talking about. And some people on the spectrum don't need that room, and some of them do. And so offering the option, because what you want them to learn how to do is you want them to learn how to manage themselves appropriately in the environment. That's the goal. And so, let's see. And so we often call it taking a break. And that's a good thing, you know. These are my Google pictures here for taking a break. But, you know, it's a nice thing. It's a nice thing to build in as we go. And all in all, I'm just sharing a few kinds of visual tools with you in this program. The book that you all got in your red bag is the Visual Strategies for Improving Communication. That's the first book in my series of 2, and it gives you some ideas about how visual strategies, you know, can be used and some different things that you can do. There's a book in the back on that where all those sample books are. It's called Solving Behavior Problems in Autism, and that's like book 2 in the series, but it gives you more ideas about what some of the causes of the behavior problems are, and then ways that you can use visuals to help with that. But the bottom line is, whatever the need is, whatever you're identifying what a situation is, or a challenge is, or a difficulty is, if I can encourage you to begin to think about what does the individual need? What kind of information does that person need? And how can I make that visual? If you just think about those 2 things, you will be able to master lots and lots of situations that you might have to deal with, either with patrons, either with visitors to the library, especially your younger ones and your ones that have some more significant challenges, or, you know, on the other end, you know, those who work with you and work for you. You know, it's like looking at how I can use this as a tool that can help in any situation that I have. One of the things that many people benefit from is just the ability to make choices. Would you rather do this, or would you rather do this? Would you like to do this first, or would you like to do that first? And building in choice making, and we can do it, you know, I mean, where do you want lunch from today? Should we go here? Should we go here? It can be very useful and helpful. The other thing that's an interesting concept that's weaving its way into education, and it's weaving its way into other places too, is just the concept of work environment. And by now, you've probably seen some of those commercials on TV where they have the very desk, and the desk stands up like this, and you can stand at your computer instead of sit down on a chair all the time. But who's to say that we're supposed to sit all the time for everything? And, you know, in schools now, they're coming up with other ways to have, you know, stand-up things and stand-up tables and things like that. And that can make a huge difference for kids, especially those who are very active. But it's not just kids. Many people will work better, be more productive if they're not sitting at a desk all day, you know, or sitting in front of a computer all the time. So looking at variety and variations along the way can be really good. And then we've already mentioned the sensory environment thing, and we've got some wonderful examples here, but just having some options available that can help individuals. And, you know, I love to ask people, what helps you? You know, what do you want here? What do you need? You know, that kind of thing. Organized spaces. I think the library is like the king, is it a king or a queen, of organized spaces. You know, but that's one of the things that makes the library very engaging. But, you know, I ran into a circumstance, because I think even that sometimes you have to really look at what you've got from another person's point of view. When my oldest granddaughter was about 8 or 9, she's a voracious reader, way, way above her skill level. And so I took her to the library, and she asked the librarian for some girls' books. Okay, and so the librarian sent her over to one section of the library, and so I let her go, and so she started looking through the books, and she came back with a whole armload. Well, she came back with a lot of romance novels, that were not quite age appropriate. And so I went and asked the librarian, I said, I don't think we're finding the right books here. Well, what they had done is they had, you know, like some girl books, and then they had the teenage girl books, but there wasn't really a visual dividing line between them, which, I mean, in the librarian's mind, I'm sure she thought, well, right here is this and right there is that. But my 8-year-old granddaughter didn't see the invisible divide, I guess I would call it. And so, you know, you begin to think about what your organization looks like through a different set of eyes. And does it make sense to someone else the way it makes sense to you? And I put this one in here because, you know, I'm talking about using visuals, and I'm talking about, you know, putting signs up or putting charts or schedules and different things that, you know, can, you know, I think labeling an environment is a very good thing. A sign pointing to where something is. You know, I want you to put the sign for the young girls' books versus the teenage girls' books and that kind of thing. But sometimes people get carried away a little bit, you know, and then there's too many signs with too many things and too much stuff. I think we have to make sure that we don't go overboard with it. You know, there's some pieces of this down here that are nice and organized, but there's stuff that's just like, for me, this is visually overwhelming, and we don't ever want to go there either. And number 10 of my 12 is giving rules, creating rules. I think all library patrons can benefit from that. You know, it's just, this is the rule, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. You know, you don't want to give them 57,000 rules, but some that are very specific. And, you know, it's putting that information in the location where you need it, so that it's, you know, if you need a rule in the periodical department, then you put it in the periodical department. If you needed it by the bathroom, then you put it by the bathroom, that kind of thing. So, oh, and I had written on there, don't assume. You know, lots of times we create rules and everybody knows that when you're in the library, you're supposed to use a quiet voice. But you don't necessarily assume that everybody knows that. There, I don't assume. Timers are wonderful. Timers work really well for transitions. Timers work really well to give more structure to jobs, to give more structure to activities. And so I think the library can benefit from having timers to use for different activities. If you have someone working for you, you know, giving them a timer of some kind to provide some structure and some boundaries for different jobs can be a really helpful thing. And there's one thing that, it's a little bit of psychology, because we know that those on the autism spectrum sometimes have difficulty with transitions, and telling them to stop something, especially if it's not complete, can be really challenging. But a little bit of psychology that can help is, instead of using a timer for stopping, sometimes what people will do is use a timer for starting. So that we say, okay, you're doing this, or you're working on this job or whatever, but you know, you're working on this activity. But then when the timer goes off, we're not saying you have to stop what you're doing. We're saying when the timer goes off, you have to go over here and do this thing. So you're kind of turning it around, so it's not a stop, it's a start. Does that make sense? Sometimes it's little teeny subtle things like that that can make a difference for people being comfortable. And number 12 is being an effective communication partner. And we can become more effective as communication partners if we do a couple special things. One thing is making sure that we have somebody's attention before we're communicating with them. One thing is making sure that we're speaking at the right speed and at the right volume. Okay. And one thing is that we're not relying just on speech to give information, but that we're using some of those other forms of communication. It could be gestures, it could be facial expressions, it could be you know, using pictures or written language or or some kind of a visual support. So there's a variety of different things, but it's making sure that we have that toolbox of different forms of communication so that we pull out what we need when we need it. Sometimes things are going just fine, it's not a big deal. Okay, everybody's happy and everything is working. You know, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But if we're noticing that there's some issue, we're noticing something's not working quite right, we're noticing that something needs a little more support. Now we've been talking about some things like this that can help give that information and help the individual be more comfortable. And you know, it's interesting to me because one of the things that many people tell me, now this is people on the autism spectrum, this is their parents, this is their teachers, and what they will tell me is the presence of those visual tools helps alleviate a lot of anxiety. And it's an interesting thing because sometimes the challenge is not that a person can't do something, not that they can't understand, but they're working so hard inside to try and figure everything out. And when they get a little extra help, it helps relieve the anxiety. And the thing is that sometimes we don't communicate quite as clearly as we think we do. You know, we just need to remember that along the way. And sometimes we just plain don't give enough information because we assume that people know. But there's a few more little things I need to share with you here, okay? Couple of comments about the employee. And yesterday it was very heartwarming to hear some of the speakers yesterday because they're very clear in explaining what some of their strengths are and what some of their challenges are. And those that have a really good understanding of themselves, I think sometimes our people on the autism spectrum will, you know, understand themselves better than some of us do because they've worked really hard at trying to understand all of that. And those that really have that ability to self-disclose, you know, can flourish really well because not only do they understand themselves, but when they can share that with you, then that helps you be more understanding and more compassionate and a better communication partner with them. But keeping in mind that the greatest challenge that they may have may fall more in the social domain, and that does fall under communication. But that social thing, it's like reading the social cues and understanding what somebody meant and things like that. And again, it's like don't assume that somebody understands everything the way it was intended. Something that can be really helpful for someone who's in an employee situation is to have a supervisor who really understands, or to have a buddy of some kind whose job is just to kind of help and support along the way. I know a gentleman who is very high skilled, but has significant Asperger's social issues. And he gets and loses jobs regularly. He talks to me about it, but one of the job situations that he has, he was so delighted because he said, you know, my supervisor is teaching me how to go to a staff meeting. And she told me how I need to sit and how I need to sit up and how I need to put my hands and how I need to, when to contribute and when not to say anything, and just listen instead. And he was, you know, he was really relieved because she was giving him instruction on something that, again, would fall in the assumed category for someone else. But that's the idea of having a supervisor or a buddy or something that can just help to be a bridge, that can be a safe place to talk about what some of the issues are. And you know, it's not just employees, but a lot of people who visit the library for different purposes can have a better experience if they have perhaps a special person that they can talk to or that they can have a relationship with. So it's just meeting those individual needs in unique ways. Now this is David, And I just want to give you an example of what David's experience is. David is on the autism spectrum. He's a little lower skilled, but he can go from home, get on a subway, go to his work setting, okay? But in order to do that, his mom and his caregiver needed to really think about what did he need to be able to do in order to do that. And so he needed to know how to get his subway ticket. He needed to know where to go through the right turnstile to get to the right train. And then he needed to know what do you do if your ticket doesn't work? Have you ever gotten a ticket and it didn't work for one reason or another? And he needed to know where to get off the train. And he needed to know what to do if he got off at the wrong stop. And then, and he needed to have some information about who to call if there was a problem. That's a whole lot of stuff that he has to go through and figure out before he ever got to work in the morning. Could that be a little stressful? Yeah, but they figured it out for him, okay? And then he needed a lot of visual supports to accomplish that. He had a phone that had all these things on it, but he needed a timer to let him know when it was time to leave home to walk to the subway. He needed the watch or the clock on there to help him, manage the time. He needed some cue cards. You can do that either with physical cards or it could be right on his phone that, helped him remember how much money do you have to have, how many dollar bills do you need and that kind of thing. He needed a schedule for the train so he would get on the right train at the right time. He needed some directions written down so that he would remember what to do and where to go and so forth. He needed an emergency phone number, and of course he had to have his ID. That was all in his phone. And that was, so that phone for him was very instrumental in helping him gain a tremendous amount of independence. But look at what preparation had to happen before he even got to work. And then these same kinds of tools can be helpful for him at work too. But imagine the day he gets off at the wrong stop. He's not going to be very relaxed at work that day, because something didn't go right in the morning. So there's a lot of things to be aware of and a lot of sensitivities, but the visual supports helped him to become highly independent. You didn't need a caregiver to take him to work. Big difference. Okay. And the point is, I think to summarize some of this is just don't assume. Don't assume because somebody has really good communication skills and has a lot of intellectual ability that they might not have a few of those Swiss cheese holes there. And they may know what those Swiss cheese holes are, and they may be able to communicate them to you very well, or they may not realize that they're there. And you might discover them and then help them learn how to handle them. And when you're working with very young children, or you have very young children in your environment, they might have great big Swiss cheese holes. And then as they get older and older and older, those Swiss cheese holes are going to close up. They're going to learn more skills. And so, if you have a teenager in your library environment, you would expect, some different behavior and some different needs than if you're working with very young children. Some of these tools that we've just been talking about, these 12 tools, if you just imagine having a little red toolbox, like they put tools in the hardware department, and you've got them, and then you refer to them when you have a situation and you think, what should I do about this, or how can I help this? And, some basics. Basics, I think the schedule, the calendar, the basic giving information are those basic things, and then you can build from there. Materials in the library. This is just, I added a couple of things that I thought of along the way. As an educator and as a person working with lots of individuals on the autism spectrum, a couple of things I thought about when you think about what's in your library. One is topics for individuals who have very unusual interests. Because what you'll find is some of your individuals on the autism spectrum will have very specific, very keen interests in very select areas that you might not typically have a lot of that information in your library. So it's, a needs assessment that I'll talk about in a minute. Another topic area that I think is really important, and this is a little bit more difficult, is information related to growth and development and social and personal things that are not too socially mature. For example, sex education, social development for teenager age kids, middle school age kids, but you also need to have, and those materials are there, but you need to have some of those materials that are on I guess I would call it a less sophisticated level, or would be more at a social level rather than an age level for individuals in this group. It's very hard to find materials that really match their social needs. And so that would be an area that I know parents and educators are often looking for. We've already talked about the jobs, so I think, remembering those 12 essentials are really good. Also materials, and it's interesting to me, if I go into a bookstore, I go into a library to see what information they have about autism, and most places don't have very much. I can go into, we have Barnes & Noble, they've got a zillion books there, and in the autism department they'll have maybe 5 or 6 books, and that's it. And not nearly enough. And I'll tell you, I've worked, well, because I have my own books, but I've also worked with a number of, publishers at conferences and things like that. And one of the things that they tell me is that there are many, what you call first-person books out there, where a parent is writing about their experience with their own child, and that's usually it, or my brother or my cousin and different things like that. And people find those interesting, but they don't tell you enough about what to do. And so there's a huge need for some of the books that tell you what to do. And those are not necessarily represented well in the libraries. Also, just to keep in mind that some of what I would call older books can be still some of the best ones. I know sometimes what librarians will try to do in bookstores is like, okay, what just came out in the last year or two, and you really focus on those. And yet, my book, my visual strategies book, the first version of that came out in 1995, and it's still considered a bestseller in the market, and nobody else has written on that topic in that way. Tony Atwood's first book that came out in the mid-1990s is still considered one of the classics. Carol Gray's book, the Social Stories book, some of these have been, there's updated versions of them, but it's still considered one of the main books. And so I think in this field, it's looking at those things that have been classics over time, because they've hit the mark, hit the bullseye so beautifully that there's not any competition, in those key books, even though they've been around a while, are still the real, still the really important sources for information. They're there. So keeping that in mind. More materials. Another thing, just to keep in mind, I know libraries now have a lot of different little workshops and different things in there. And when we're talking about making visual tools, your parents and your educators can often benefit if you have things like picture resources and laminating and Velcro, or the teacher workshop kind of things, because when they're trying to make visual tools for students either at home or at school, they really like and benefit from those kinds of materials. There's also other media that's out there now for teachers and for parents, and who really looks a lot. I find, like on my website and on my Facebook page, is I get a lot of teachers, aides, and paraprofessionals because they're not in a situation where they've had the benefit of the education that the teachers have had, and yet they're striving to learn very much what they can so that they can be better at their jobs. And so keeping that in mind too, there's other media like DVDs and CDs and digital books and membership sites and some things like that. And I don't know enough about how libraries access all of that, but there's a lot of non-book resources that are out there and available also. And just as a note, sometimes it's small publishers, like I am a small publisher, you know, I don't have the same advantage to get into places that, you know, like I don't go to Bunkers or whatever, you know, whatever, I forget the name of that place anyway. But I don't have the advantages that some of the big publishers do in terms of publicizing information and so forth. So, one of the things that you can do, and you may already do this, but to help really meet the needs of your clients, your population, is to do a simple needs assessment. Asking questions like, you know, are you an individual, you know, like you want to kind of find out where are your individuals with special needs, the families or the caregivers or the educators of that population. How often do you visit? Why do you come? You know, some people might bring their students because it's entertainment. Some might bring it because they're looking for specific information. You know, what are you looking for in content? What are you looking for in the environment? What is your favorite thing in the library? You might find some interesting answers when you start asking some of these questions. Are you looking for any kind of special programs? Do you have any special interests that you would like to see in the library? So you might find that there are some things that you'll discover that you didn't know were there. Here's more. Simple need, you know, needs assessment for the environment. What makes the library a comfortable place for you? What do you wish was here that could help you? What is your favorite thing about the library environment? Is there anything in the environment that's difficult for you? You might find out some interesting things you didn't realize. And then just to meet the needs of the special needs community. Letting people know what you can do for them and what kind of accommodations are available. Because sometimes you might have some accommodations that people don't even know about. And how to let them know, how to let you know what they need. That's an interesting, it's another assumed thing, you know. But what you have to do is be careful. Just like, you know, the clerk at the store that has the discount for those who are senior citizens, they can't ask you, are you a senior citizen so I can give you the discount? Well, you can't say, you know, you look like you have some special needs, can I give you a survey? But, you know, you have to be a little delicate about that, but at the same time, you know, letting people know that you're trying to get more information, it goes a long way. And so the bottom line is that the library can be a friend. You know, because you have the structure, you have the content, you have so much based already there. Yeah, you know, this is a real nice, natural partnership that, and in so many ways, for the whole spectrum, because you can be a friend for those younger children who have more behavior needs and communication needs and things, and you can have a great relationship with those who are older, depending on their skill level. You still can do that, and you're establishing here that this is a great work environment. So that's a really positive thing too. And these are just some of my little goodies, and I've been doing a lot of talking, but I'm wondering if anybody has any questions. Anybody? Yeah.
Good morning.
Hi.
Do you do presentations for other groups?
I do.
Okay.
I do. On your hand, oh, you don't have a handout. Okay. Use visualstrategies.com is my website. And if you go to my website, there's a place on there where you can ask for information. My Facebook page is lindahodgdon.autism. I have another page that I'm not going to tell you the name of, and that's my personal one. And so I want people to go to the autism page because I do a lot of, I'm learning how to do Facebook Live, and I'm learning how to do a lot on Facebook. And the Facebook social strategy is to ask people to come and like me. So will you please come and like me on Facebook, and we'll do that. But also, if you go to the website, I have a newsletter. You can sign up there and you can get the newsletter. And I write on a lot of topics, and I'll tell you right now, I'm going to be writing on this topic of libraries and autism because I think that this is really a fabulous topic to share. Yeah, okay? Anybody else? Question? Yes.
Are websites ever like an issue? Do you know, like, do they ever need I guess like a way to have?
Can you put the mic closer to your mouth, sweetie, so I can hear better? I know it's hard. It sounds funny, doesn't it?
Are websites ever an issue? Like, do we ever need like a way to not have as many moving pictures or anything for a library website?
Do you ever have a need for?
It's like a tailored website. I'm just wondering about that. Do you know?
A library website. I think that's a really good idea so that you would have some pictures, an explanation on the library website. Is that what you mean? Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. It's a good example of how what we do is we put everything in print. You know, we just write it all down and we print it all out. And adding some visuals is a really, really good idea. Yes. I see a hand way in the back. I can't hear unless you're talking on the mic. I'm sorry. See, this is this little communication thing, isn't it? Thank you.
So what I'm wondering is, how would, for topic number 8, how would you look at building in physical activity, sensory and motor needs into either a general library space or into a programming room for people who have autism?
Okay, so how would I figure out how to build in a space that meets those physical needs?
Yes, basically. Do you have any good stories of libraries or public access areas being able to do that?
Well, I don't have any library stories. I'm hoping to hear some from the group.
Okay.
And does anybody have a story about that right now? I think a good start is this sensory room over here, the quiet room over here, because what that room has is some different kind of furniture. It has some fidget toys and things like that. I think that if you think about the physical needs of people, you know, some people, particularly children, that you could easily have a room that has some equipment in it, or some, you know, just for example, there was a store right down here that I went to, an antique store on the way to my hotel, and they had these wonderful, it was like a if you imagine a beanbag chair, only it wasn't a chair, it was more like a mat, you know. So something like that, or beanbag chairs, or you know, some different kinds of furniture that better accommodate to the movement that some individuals need, as opposed to the traditional table and chairs. Kind of like a lounge area. There, you know, you can go to many stores and see some of these kinds of furniture that, you know, even in toy stores or in IKEA type stores and things like that. Does that help? Another thing that some children really like is things like tent or something that's quite closed in. You know, they can like that also. Okay, do we have any other questions? Yes. I can't hear.
You hear me now?
I can hear you,
are.
okay.
There's usually like a little delay. Not another question, but just a comment talking about beanbag chairs. So beanbag chairs are great, but like for instance, for someone like me who's larger and has some mobility issues, being that close to the floor is like a recipe
And you
for
can't get
disaster.
up, I'm like that too.
So one of the things that we have at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is we created respite rooms, which
Okay.
are basically calm rooms. And both of them have, we have two of them, both of them have rocking chairs.
Okay,
And both of them have the sitting balls, the
Okay.
ones that you sit on, that look like big exercise balls. So those are alternatives as well. Instead of having just, you know, wooden chairs around tables, have a variety of chairs, some with arms,
That's
some
excellent.
without balls, not balls, you know, whatever.
yeah.
As a way to accommodate multiple.
That's excellent. In case anybody's not familiar with the balls, they have these great big exercise balls like you do like yoga balls and stuff. And people will sit on those instead of on a chair. And what that does is it helps you to keep alert, and they have to, you know, keep their body balanced, and that does a lot for their sensory system. You know, an occupational therapist is a good person to assist with that sensory room thing too. Yes.
We can have our last question.
Okay.
One thing I also want to mention about furniture, one of my news groups showed an elementary school teacher who took tennis balls, cut them in half, and hot glued them to the seat in the back of the chair.
Yeah, because of the noise. Yes.
Well, one point I have to make is it's good timing that this is coming into the libraries because we are really getting big on maker spaces and finding ways to advocate for certain populations in our library as far as for spaces and stuff. So this is great timing. But I had a question. I know as schools, like I know that some speech pathologists and different people come in and they consult with school districts. The question I have is, do you do any sort of consulting maybe for libraries coming in, looking at the space, looking at, getting an idea of like how maybe, because what I've learned is that, you know, you might be in, the people who are in the environment on a daily basis may not be able to think the same way exactly. You could, being that you go to different, like for example, you probably travel to different schools, you see different environments, you get different ideas. And so then I noticed that some speech pathologists, they'll become like consultants and stuff for schools. Do you are there anyone who does that for
Yes,
like libraries?
I mean, I do consulting work. I have not done library consulting work.
Yeah.
I think it's I mean, I've done it in classrooms, and so the library is a natural juxtaposition, I like that word, of that. You know, it's a natural fit. And yes, I do that. The only issue that I have is I'm in Michigan and you're in Illinois. But there's also a lot that can be done virtually now. You know, so, you know, certainly if that's something, contact me and we can talk about how to make that work.
And also, I don't think everybody realizes that one of the services available through the Targeted Autism Program is to have, right now it's Mary, last year it was me, but to have somebody come into the library and do consultations about the physical facility and the program.
Okay, this is your
So
local
you just have to
consultant.
contact Mary College.
She gets it all.
Or you can contact Suzanne.
Yeah, and Suzanne, okay. So those are your local consultants to do that. And that's an excellent idea because you're right. When you're there and you don't see it the same way that somebody else might see it. And so
Okay.
that's, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.